Hey guys, it's Dasher Zach back with another review, this time of the Mechlands M75. They moved into the Hall effect space, and as you may have glimpsed there, it does look very similar to their Blade 75, although this only has a partial aluminum construction. The overall aesthetic, feel, and performance of this keyboard really impressed me, and coming in at $70, this is quite the steal. But in a sea of budget Hall effect options, does this keyboard set itself apart in a way that deserves a spot in your setup? Let's find out. So here we have it, the Mechlands M75, their first foray into Hall effect keyboards, and with this nice aluminum backplate here, rubberized feet, as well as support feet with two different tiers, and a pretty thick aesthetic. I do love the sort of like almost paint splatter here in the top, and again, the aesthetic on this, very, very similar to the Blade 75 that I just reviewed. I talked about how the Blade 75, if it had been Hall effect, would be my main keyboard, end of story, end game for gaming. It wasn't Hall effect. This one is. Obviously, we sacrificed the aluminum case, and we'll have a very different typing feel here, but let's get into it. I won't spend too much time here, but this does have all the bells and whistles as far as performance goes, and it comes in at a very low $70, a direct competitor to the M shows that I just covered, but in the 75% layout, which you love to see. There's a $10 upcharge for that size of layout on the M shows lineup. This does have the Ootemu, I believe it is, magnetic switch, which I've heard they're on the cheaper side, but the performance and feel on this was pretty nice for me. It does turn out that I'm just a moron. Those two side plates are indeed aluminum, and a cool thing that I'll get to here in a bit is that this knob can be hot swapped out for a key, pretty sick. But beyond that, it's got the standard performance you'd expect, AK polling, very low latency, 32K scan rate, DKS, mod tap, SOCD, etc., etc. Then as far as the switches go, 45 GF to get 2mm, 3.5 total travel. Does not have the initial force here required for the switch, but I do not find that to be too far on the low side by any means at all. Jumping back to the board itself, let's take a look at the keycaps and the switches. Double shot PBT keycap here. It is not shine through, but does feel high quality. And then here we have the switch with that light purple bottom and that clear top with the south facing RGB. Nicely boxed stem here, pretty stable, not a lot of wobble. I will say the sound of the switch here is not reflecting how loud the keyboard actually is in use. But overall, decent feeling, a little on the cheaper side perhaps, but in use and in my feel, not too bad. I will say I've never tested super high-end switches before, so I'm looking to do that here in the future to get a strong comparison and talking point to base that from. Very nice to have the switches be hot swappable though, always a consideration that I appreciate. And then as you can see here, popping out the spacebar, we do have nice considerations here for sound of the spacebar, which dampens it and doesn't make it too hollow, loud, or clacky. Nicely lubed stabilizers here as well, and the switches themselves are also pre-lubed and feel very smooth. As far as the build quality of the board goes, even though it's an all plastic construction, there's not really any bend or flex here that I'm detecting out of the ordinary. It feels very well built, very solid, and very cohesive. As far as the gasket mount goes, if you see me pressing here, there's pretty much no give at all. Very much on the same wavelength as M shows and not very similar to Emblem Maker. So it's a very like stiff, linear typing feel. It doesn't have any of that soft, cushiony feel, but that didn't really take away with the typing experience in my opinion. But if you're a person who knows you want a little bit more of that give in the gasket mount structure, just giving you a quick heads up. Another cool feature here is the multifunction scroll wheel. Can be used to control volume, mute, and other things. But the super cool part of it, it's hot swappable. You can pop this right out here. I'll take one of the extra switches they provided with the keyboard, pop that right in. They also provided this extra insert keycap. Throw that right on there, and who even had a knob? This knob is gone. And if you want another functional key here like insert, which you could also remap, go right ahead. Not a feature I'll use because I do love the knob, but pretty cool that it's that easy to do. Good stuff, Mechlands. And as you can see, the knob, super easy to pop back in here, slide it back on, and we are good to go. I'm gonna give a quick wait, and if you're wondering why I do this, it's sort of because I do this for all my keyboards, and I timestamp it, so if you want to give a quick reference to how heavy a keyboard is, maybe how premium it might feel between the plastic or the aluminum, you can just check the timestamps in any of my reviews and get a head-to-head comparison. This keyboard comes in at 2 pounds, 0.3 ounces, which works itself out to 916 grams. Another one of my favorite parts of the review, and that's taking a look at the RGB. Here we go. It's quite interesting on this keyboard. I will say the color of the keycaps on a keyboard does have an effect on how the RGB comes through, and because these are not shine through, it does suppress it a little bit. The lights themselves are still vibrant, but they don't really pop quite as well. With the keyboard, I will say if I were to use this long term, I would definitely probably set like a single color, maybe white or like a green to sort of match the like lime green keycaps here. But overall, the RGB is bright, does shine through, and it's there. Some of you might turn this off anyway if you're not that sort of RGB gamer. For me, I usually like to keep something like a flower dance on, which is what they call it, at least all of the Chinese softwares. But due to the colorway of the keyboard, doesn't quite pop as much as I'd like it to. Getting into the software here, hey, does this look familiar? You've probably seen this before. This looks like the old non-web Emblem Maker driver, and it's used across a lot of keyboards in the same space. Not surprising. It is definitely not my favorite software, but it does get the job done. I will say for me, this is the software that took the longest to decipher the first time what exactly I wanted to do, but it does have all the settings you would need to get stuff done. Something that may be improved in the Mechlands version, or I may just be a bit of a moron when I reviewed previous keyboards from Emblem Maker, that you can drag and drop and select keys here at any point in the keyboard, which is great to change certain keys, like WASD for example. But this is all the settings you would want on a software. It does have the functionality you'd like, up to 0.1 here on the actuation. You can do a full quick trigger, going down to 0.01 here on the rapid trigger, which is the advertised value that all keyboards show you. It's not usually actually the actuation point, point, but the rapid trigger setting number that is displayed. I recently, after doing some testing, did a reset, so you won't see all the minimum actuations here that I've been playing around with before, but I typically run with a full quick trigger. I usually have this all the way down to the minimum. On this, the number's not crazy at 0.01, so putting these all the way down to the minimum did not cause any accidental actuations, and my movements were totally fine and not like jagged. I wasn't having any accidental key presses like I have had on other keyboards before. And you can also take the dead zone all the way down to 0 if you want, or as high as 1 millimeter. I typically set this dead zone to 0 as well. Did not have any problems doing so on this keyboard. Hopefully your mileage does not vary from mine. Coming to the shaft settings here, you can have some default settings for certain very popular magnetic switches you might throw on the keyboard given the hot swap ability, but I'm sticking with the default settings here, but the switches that came with the keyboard. And then there's also advanced settings like DKS, mod tap, as well as snap key. Quick little snap key here. You can see I already have it set up for AD&D. Very straightforward. Works like a charm. As you can see, already bound. Nothing here to write home about in other settings. Standard functions to remap, as well as set macros and your lighting. Let's see if I can find one here that I like more. Flowers Blue, I believe, is one I typically like. I will say the speed of the RGB on this keyboard very slow by default, so typically I have it on the minimum. I actually turn it up to the maximum just to get that thing to flow more. A side note that you might not care about, but I'm sure some will. You can share your settings, check your firmware upgrades, and that's about it. Given this is a wired only keyboard, I'm assuming it's always running on 8K hertz, and there's nowhere to change that polling rate anywhere in the settings that I found here. So overall, not my favorite software, but as per usual, gets the job done and it has all the settings that you would need. So as far as my overall impressions of this keyboard, I'm actually really impressed with it. This is one of my favorite sort of budget HE keyboards that I've tested recently. I do love the aesthetic here of these keycaps. I love the fact that you get a knob and that it's hot swappable. So if you're not a knob person, you can drop this. If you have an external knob, give yourself another keycap, why not? The 75% layout, pristine, perfect, my favorite. And then something you hear here in the typing test. When I'm gaming, I do not mind a more like stable setup here as far as the keys go, as far as the gasket mount and the give. This felt very snappy when typing and in game. It's not overly loud, but it has a very satisfying sort of subtle sound to it. And something I did not demonstrate earlier, after showing you the switches, is that the keycaps here are very stable. There's very limited wobble. Very impressive for a keyboard in this price range and using the switches that it does. So overall, I'll say something that I haven't really said before. Certain keyboards just have like an appeal. They have something that makes you want to pick it up. Very similar to how there's like a certain mouse, like you might not be able to quantify why. It's just a mouse you want to use. And this for me was a keyboard that I just wanted to use that I kept coming back to. I do like the aesthetic and the fact that there is a metal aspect to it in some way here, even though it's generally a plastic construction. And then beyond the sound and feel aspects that I've talked about, this thing just did perform very well for me. It was one of those keyboards where I was able to put it on minimum settings and didn't have any issues with accidental key presses for being overly sensitive. You may have heard me talk before about how I prefer to be able to tune too far to the point where it's too sensitive and tune it back. And if you're absolutely min-maxing, I would say that is the way to go. But sometimes it is nice to just have a keyboard where you can turn this thing to as sensitive as it can go. It feels very responsive in game, like this did to me when testing out in Fortnite. Again, not a lot of competitive play for me in Fortnite lately, but I went into some scenarios that really stressed movement just to test out how this felt, and it felt extremely responsive. No less responsive to me than any other keyboard that I've tested recently. For $70, a very solid impression for me from Mechlands. But before I jump into a sort of conclusion-like talk, let's pause and hit that sound test. So coming out of that sound test, just a quick commentary. It's more of like a laid-back, chill sound, sort of like the HE80 from Apple Maker. It still has a satisfying, like very light thok to it maybe. Not sure why I just changed my voice inflection like that. But anyways, not like a crazy refined sound, but just more chill, laid-back, one that I can really appreciate. I will say there was a bit more of a rattle to the spacebar than I realized before going deeper into that sound test. It really stuck out to me when listening back to it, but not something that really bothers me in use, and just really a space that a lot of keyboards could have room for improvement for. As far as the sound profile of the spacebar goes, I had a great time on this Mechlands M75. Much like their Blade 75, they impressed me across the board. Really a big fan of what Mechland's been doing so far, and cannot wait to see where they go next as far as the Hall effect keyboards. This is definitely a keyboard that I'll be keeping in my rotation going forward, particularly because I've sort of dialed in the settings that I like, and I won't have to mess with the software too much. For $70, I definitely prefer something like this to the M-Shows A60 Pro, but it's a really close call and probably still a lean toward the M-Shows Jet 75 as far as sound and feel go, as well as software, but I do love this knob, and the sound profile on this is much different, so it might just come down to your personal preference. Please subscribe and like if you enjoyed the video. Follow me on X at DashZach. Check out my peripheral Discord, as well as the Mousecast podcast, and with that, we'll see you.